individuals who are born with this brain, this psychopathic brain, sometimes something is triggered, awakened inside of them at a very early age where hurting things, torture, harm, blood, dismemberment becomes somehow associated with sexual pleasure. And this triggers something or awakens something in them that then progresses over years and years and reaches a tipping point where they simply can't live in fantasy anymore, but they have to kill.
Welcome back. We are on today on the Tour for This Shit podcast. I'm your host, Angie Sorensen. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad to have you here. If you're new to this podcast, this is an interview-based podcast where you'll find a wide range of topics and guests such as doctors, sex workers, women who escape cults, scientists, psychotherapists, coaches, divorce lawyers, and so many more. When a series is live, I publish every other Monday. Now, this series should go on till at least the end of October 2024. Maybe even longer, but I don't want to overpromise right now. So the plan is till at least the end of October. Okay, on to today's episode. I really enjoyed today's guest. Today's guest is Dr. Scott Bonn. I could have spoken with him for hours, okay? For hours. He just keeps dropping gold nuggets. Just gold all the way through. Just a trigger warning, because we talk about serial killers, this episode contains sensitive content, and so discretion is advised. So I just want to give a moment for you to think about it. If you're still here, okay. Then I don't even want to divulge all the goodness we will uncover. I just want you to experience Scott just like I did. And for this episode, I've created a handy PDF guide just for you that neatly summarizes the differences between psychopathy, sociopathy, serial killers, and the different things that we talk about in this episode, making it easier for you to remember, follow, and understand these topics. It also includes the books and the documentary that Scott mentions. The link is available in the show notes. It will direct you to enter your email so I can send you the PDF. And by signing up, you'll also receive future updates from me about the podcast, behind the scenes content, and information on upcoming episode release. So, without further ado, please help me give a big, warm welcome to Scott. Let's begin. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Scott Bonn. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Angie. It's great to be here.
Now, honestly, I've really been looking forward to today's discussion. We're going to talk about serial killers because not only are you a criminologist who studied them, you also interviewed. There's two that I know of. You interviewed David Berkowitz, who was known as Son of Sam, and Dennis Rader, who was known as BTK, which stands for Bind, Torture, Kill. And you wrote a book on it as well. So really, really excited. I hope that you could see that by the questions I sent you. I'm super, super keen to get into this. And so before we dive in, Scott, please introduce yourself, where you live, and even though I've already said a little bit what you do, but if you wanted to maybe say it in your own words, what you do.
Certainly. Well, Dr. Scott Bonn, I have a PhD in criminology and a master's degree in criminal justice. I have a background both in teaching at the university level, as well as consulting with the media. And I have been focusing in particular on serial killers for probably the last almost 20 years. I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, with my beautiful wife, Maxine, and our son, Mike, and our Weimaraner dog, Maggie. And so I'm excited to talk to you today.
I mean, how did you get into this line of work, Scott?
Well, I've had a lifelong interest in human nature and motivations ever since I was a kid.
Hmm.
And I've always been interested in both the light side or bright side of the human condition as well as the dark side. What makes people do good, what makes people do bad. And when I went off to college at the age of 18, I was through my school counselor and parents encouraged me to pursue the light side, and they said, "Well, you know what? Why don't you go into advertising and focus on why people buy certain products and make decisions like that?" So I did, and I spent about 20 years of my initially in my career doing advertising and marketing, and I liked it. But then after 9/11 in the United States, when things radically changed and the economy went bad for a while and advertising was not a good field to be in, I said, you know what? I'm going to go back and pursue the dark side now. I'm going to pursue the other side of the human condition that's always fascinated me, why people do bad things. And if there's any field that is recession proof that I don't have to worry about the economy right now, it's crime. So in fact, when the economy's bad, crime usually goes up. So it's actually a positive thing in that regard. So I went off, like I said, spent 6 years studying this, and then started teaching at the university level at a university named Drew University, which is located just outside of Manhattan, New York. And I was teaching criminology. And then an interesting thing happened is whenever I would talk about serial killers in the classroom, I noticed that my students their ears would just perk up and they were so excited when I would talk about these things. And that reminded me in my years in the media world, in advertising, and in particular during the time that I spent as a vice president of marketing at NBC Television Network, I realized that certain crime stories just captivate the population. And I'm talking about stories like O.J. Simpson's murder trial, the Menendez brothers. Some people may remember the murder of Gianni Versace, the fashion mogul. And these stories just become larger than life. And oftentimes the predators involved, the criminals, become somewhat celebrities themselves. And this just fascinated me. So this sent me on a journey to pursue really the public's fascination with diabolical characters, that some of whom you mentioned, like the Son of Sam and Bind, Torture, Kill. And so I've spent literally the last 15 years of my career pursuing this and exploring our fascination with the dark side and how these individuals fit into it. So you might even say that the first 20 years of my career set me up in terms of understanding the media, how it works, how public images are set, how individuals become almost like rock stars, if you will, in popular culture, and then combined it with my criminology. So I've really, I've combined the two over the last 15 years.
And also communication, because in media and advertising, communication is key, and then teaching communication is key. So you've really got the whole shebang in your under your bonnet, really.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and and as you know, I've even taken it a step further now because I do a live theatrical one-man show that I take around the United States and from city to city and talk for about 90 minutes to an audience about my experiences with these individuals and take them literally on a journey into the dark side of the serial killer mind. And it's just been fascinating, being able to spend time with an audience and have their reactions and answer their questions has really been very, very fulfilling.
Yeah. No, I hope you take it to Europe. I hope you take it to Europe so that I can
I
actually
hope
come and
I hope
see
so too.
you.
I hope so too. My booking agent is he's looking at all those opportunities right now. So I would love to do that.
Good, good. Because actually, there's a just a little as a side note. When I was a teenager, I did think about studying criminology, and then I watched the movie Seven, and
Mm.
and I was like, oh no, not doing that. not the chance. So instead, I let others study it, and then I talk to you. So yeah, I mean that movie, I was like, that scared me. I was like, not studying that.
Yeah, well, he was, John Doe definitely was a serial killer. And a very frightening character.
Yeah,
It was a good movie. I mean, it was,
it's a good movie.
obviously fiction, but very, very effective and very scary.
Yeah, I mean, because there was a whole thematic behind. There was a whole theme. It was,
Yeah,
it was
yes,
intense.
exactly.
Yeah.
The seven deadly sins.
Yes, exactly. So I wanted to ask you, what is the difference between sociopathy, like between a sociopath and a psychopath?
Good question. Good question. And in fact, there's a myth out there that all serial killers are mentally ill, that they must be mentally ill. And and so when I tell people they're not clinically or legally in most cases, people will say, "Well, come on, I mean, look what they do. They've got to be batshit crazy. What do you mean they're not mentally ill?" Well, clinically speaking, according to the American Psychiatric Association, the vast majority of serial killers, and I'm talking about upwards of 80%,
Hmm.
would not be clinically defined as mentally ill because they fall into a category of either sociopath or psychopath, as you mentioned. And these are not considered clinical mental illnesses. They're considered antisocial personality disorders for which there is no cure. And the thing about these conditions is these individuals know right from wrong. They know that it's wrong to kill. They know that it's wrong to hurt people, but they simply don't care. And that is why legally, for example, they cannot use the insanity
Mm,
defense because they
yeah,
know right
yeah,
from wrong.
yeah.
And once again, clinically, they're not considered mentally ill either. And not to say that these are not troubling conditions and can be the basis for for real dangerous behavior, but these individuals, first and foremost, a sociopath and a psychopath, they have commonalities, but they also have differences too.
Hmm.
And the primary commonality is that they just have a complete indifference, rejection, and refusal to cooperate with the laws, norms, and mores of society. If they want to do something, they're going to do it, and nothing is going to stop them. The
Okay.
other thing that they have in common is, generally speaking, they have a disregard and an inability to even connect with the feelings of others, and which is why they can hurt them with impunity, because they just don't have the ability to feel remorse, pity, shame, guilt, or even fear. But
Wow.
do you want me to go in the differences between the two,
Oh,
psychopaths and
yeah, yeah, no, this is
sociopaths?
super interesting. I was just writing it down actually. Like, so they don't feel shame, remorse, fear, and guilt.
Yes, exactly,
Wow.
exactly, but there are differences between them too. I'm speaking in generalities right now,
Yeah.
but there are differences between psychopaths and sociopaths. And first of all, psychopaths are much more rare than sociopaths, and
Mm.
psychopaths are more dangerous than sociopaths. And I'll explain why. And this gets to the what I'm sure many of your audience have heard referred to as the nature versus nurture debate.
Yes.
Nature, are they born that way? Nurture, are they conditioned and environmentally trained, to
Yeah.
be that way? Well, here's where they differ. Psychopaths are a function of nature. Their
Oh.
brains at birth are simply hardwired differently to process information, to react to stimuli differently than the normal human brain. And in particular, impulse control is almost non-existent in the psychopathic brain. The frontal lobe of the brain is what controls impulses, and in the case of the psychopath, it's almost non-existent. Which is why if they want to do something, they just do it. Nothing will deter them. And when it comes to the connection, the empathetic connection, emotional connection with other living things, they are once again biologically incapable of it. They simply can't do it. They can't feel normal remorse and shame and pity and sadness for hurting someone, which is why they do it with impunity. And I frequently use the analogy here of an electronic appliance like uh, a hair dryer, for example.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a hair dryer that's plugged in the wall and then you pull the plug out, you've got a useless hair dryer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when it comes to empathy and emotional connection, psychopaths are disconnected. It's as if that cord is just pulled out of the wall. They simply can't do it. Even if they wanted to do it, they can't do it, which is why they hurt people and they just feel nothing.
Yeah, they
And
hurt people and they carry on like as if they just bought an ice cream.
exactly.
Mm.
And about 50%, probably between 45 and 50% of all serial killers fall into this psychopathic arena. And so killing is nothing more to them than, wiping, a lint off their sleeve. It just means absolutely nothing to them. And that's why they can hurt people with complete impunity. And
Mm.
so examples of true psychopathic serial killers would be someone like a Ted Bundy, a
Yes.
John Wayne Gacy, who called himself the killer clown,
Mm.
and Dennis Rader, bind, torture, kill. These are individuals who simply killing is a pastime for them. It's something that amuses them, that arouses them, but in terms of any emotional connection, they're incapable of it. Now, a sociopath is very different. A sociopath is a function of nurture, not nature.
Ah.
They are born with a brain that functions normally, that is capable of impulse control, that is capable of empathetic connection. But what happens here is these individuals often suffer long term trauma, abuse, torture, and torment themselves, and they become conditioned or socialized, hence the term sociopath, into predatory behavior themselves, often to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And so, if we're going to use that hair dryer analogy again, Angie, it's as if it's plugged in the wall here for a sociopath, and they are capable of emotional connection, but it's a faulty switch. The plug is faulty, and sometimes they can do it, and sometimes they can't. And as a result, they sociopaths are prone to very volatile emotional mood swings, even bouts of rage. And as a result, they are much easier to identify when you are confronted with a sociopath than a psychopath, because a psychopath will just seem completely unflappable, cold blooded, and no emotion at all, whereas a sociopath will be very volatile. And an example of a true sociopathic serial killer, some of your audience may be familiar with the female serial killer, Eileen Wuornos, who was depicted by Charlize Theron, the actress, actually won an Academy Award in the movie Monster some years ago. She did an incredible job.
What
Eileen,
did I have? I didn't actually see it. I should see it.
yeah, it's incredible.
What did Eileen do? What was the
Eileen
crime?
Wuornos was a female serial killer, and she was also a highway prostitute she would pick up clients, or clients would pick her up on the highway in Florida, and she would do her business that way. Well, she had been terribly abused throughout her life by men. And she, after a while, began to retaliate and take her vengeance on these men, generally speaking, who she believed had harmed her, and began killing them. And she used a gun. She was a shooter. She shot seven of her clients before she was finally apprehended. But this is a woman who was capable of emotion. She was capable of a normal range of emotions, but she was conditioned and socialized into becoming a predator herself after she had been terribly abused throughout her life.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, I have heard about this concept for sure about people can be socialized into, very antisocial behavior. And you have that
Yes.
as well in like if you grow up in a very, in an area where there's a lot of gangs, and in terms to survive, you have to adapt and have really really awful behavior so that you get respected, and then you sort
Yeah,
of
yeah.
little
It's
by little.
almost like a survival mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You know what you mentioned about psychopaths being cold and not able to feel shame, remorse, guilt, and so on for their victims and prayers, for their victims, sorry. Um, does that also mean that they may not necessarily feel fear for themselves? Like, are they never scared? Are they not worried about, like, for example, I can be scared that I may fail an exam, for example. Would a
Yeah, no,
psychopath fail
they
for the.
would not have
Mm.
the normal fear or anxiety that a normal person would have.
So they're super stable. We can say they're super stable. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
despite
well,
being
it's
completely.
almost they're machine like, it's almost just
Mm,
without a normal range of emotions, and they function more like machines. And and that's one of the things. By the way, people say, how did Bundy get away with 36 murders? How did John Wayne Gacy get away with 30 or so murders? They must be evil geniuses. No, they're not evil geniuses, and in many cases, they just have very average intelligence, sometimes even below average intelligence. But because they're psychopaths, they just are not rattled. Nothing bothers them, nothing deters them, nothing gets in their way. And they tend to be very organized, very meticulous, very compulsive. And so they don't make a lot of mistakes
mm.
that you and I would make just out of our own fear and anxiety and nervousness in trying to engage in this behavior. They don't do it because they can't feel it in the first place.
That makes a lot of sense because, yeah, you have to keep a cold head to finish the job and to tidy up after yourself. I mean, it's a bit like like surgeons. They have to keep a very cold head. So I mean, I have heard that like really high up, like brain surgeons, heart surgeons, they have to have some traits of coldness
Mm-hmm. You,
because
you
they
you
they
touched
can't start crying. They can't start crying over an open wound when they're operating, right? So
No, you touched upon an important area, Angie, because they're a friend of mine who's actually in the UK. His name is Kevin Dutton, Dr. Kevin Dutton. He studies highly functioning psychopaths who are not ending up in prison and committing crimes, at least that no one knows of, but are very, very highly functional. And so what you're saying is absolutely true. There are certain jobs, and guess what? Psychopaths are overrepresented, meaning many more of them than you would expect to find in certain places, like as partners in law firms, in CEOs of corporations,
yeah,
in politics, very high level positions in politics, and very stressful professions like neurosurgery, brain surgery, because having a an unflappable personality where nothing bothers you is a very useful condition to have in those arenas.
yeah. Oh, when you said CEOs or of companies and stuff, like I have no doubt about that. I mean, I have because I'm an executive assistant by day, and
Mm.
over the years, like I some some really like high, um, ultra high net worth individual and so on. They're not. I wouldn't. They're just very badly behaved. Some of them, but they. I wouldn't now listening to you. I wouldn't call them psychopath because they have tantrums. I mean, they lose their temper and blah 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 and stuff like that. But I have met one person, and she's a woman. This was years ago, and we all think she's a sociopath. We don't, but then again, we're not. But she's very, very cold, and she leaves a trail of distraction behind her. And
Hmm.
we don't understand how she's still in work, but a lot of people are afraid of her, and she's in a very high end. She's very high up in her position, has worked all over the world, and she doesn't just terrorizes the assistants that work for her. She did the investors are afraid of her. You name it. Just people are scared of
Hmm.
her.
Hmm.
And she's a tiny little woman.
Hmm. Hmm.
And she's very charming at the beginning, very, very charming. But yeah, so I mean, I'm not sure. but we have seen her cry, like after cry. So she probably is not a psychopath. So she may be a sociopath. I don't know. It's hard to
Well,
tell.
the interesting thing, yeah, I mean, what you described certainly sounds like she has an antisocial personality disorder of some sort,
Mm,
whether it's, and there's also narcissism, and oftentimes there's an overlap even between narcissism and psychopathy, for example. It can be both.
right.
But that doesn't mean that psychopaths don't learn to mimic emotional behavior. So psychopaths, in order to be really successful psychopath, you're going at some point you're going to have to learn when it's appropriate to mimic crying, when it's appropriate to mimic laughter, to mimic sadness. Otherwise, you will appear like a robot, like you're not human. So actually, psychopaths do learn, and they learn to effectively mimic emotional behavior and emotionality simply so that they can fit in and be successful at what they do.
It's fascinating. I mean, yeah, it's really fascinating. But there's, when you mentioned about this in this for serial killers,
Mm.
45 to 50% of them are psychopaths. What
Mm-hmm.
would the rest, obviously, and then a portion of that are sociopath, like you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
about the Eileen, who was
Warnos.
Warner's, who was a prostitute and killed her clients. So there's a portion of them are sociopath. Is that is that how they split 50-50 sociopath psychopath, or is there also
No, no,
there's other people in there?
of the 75 to 80% who have antisocial personality disorders, about two-thirds of those would be psychopaths. The others would be sociopaths. Now, of the remaining portion of the total, so if 80% have are either psychopaths or sociopaths, what about the remaining 20%? That remaining 20%, many of them are truly mentally ill, clinically
Ah,
mentally ill, paranoid schizophrenics, borderline personality disorders,
mm,
individuals with psychosis who are driven by apparitions and voices and images that only they can see. So there is a group of serial killers who are truly clinically mentally ill, but it's the minority. And the
right.
reason it's the minority is that these individuals are going to leave a trail. They're going to be easier to find than the ones who are not mentally ill, who cover up their tracks much more effectively.
Wow. Okay. So right. Okay. And so they would be able to actually claim the insanity defense when they get arrested.
Well, they potentially, yeah,
Mm,
potentially, but some of these individuals even end up killing themselves because they're mentally ill, and many of them actually feel tremendous remorse for what they're doing, but they can't control themselves. They just can't stop it, and so some of them are actually suffer tremendous emotional angst and self-loathing over what they're doing, and sometimes even take their own lives because they're just so disturbed.
and that's a clear distinction between them and a psychopath who feels no remorse.
Exactly, that's right.
Mm. So I have a question. So we mentioned obviously there's psychopaths, and some of them are highly functioning, run the world, do incredible surgery on people, all kinds of things. So what is the line between a high functioning psychopath to becoming a serial killer? What is the line they cross?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and yeah, fortunately, the vast majority of psychopaths are not violent individuals, and certainly not serial killers. It's only a very small minority of psychopaths. And by the way, psychopaths are pretty rare. Yeah, I know the statistics in the United States. So, the United States is a country of about 330 million people, and there's probably about 1.5 million psychopaths out of that 330 million, and that includes both men and women. There's more male psychopaths than female psychopaths, but there are female psychopaths. So you can see it's relatively rare. Whereas there's probably somewhere around I would say 10 or 12 million sociopaths in the United States, because again they're environmentally conditioned, they're more common. So that just to give you an idea of the ratio or the preponderance of them. But as I said, the vast majority of psychopaths are not violent by nature. What they are is just extremely goal-oriented, extremely selfish and self-absorbed, care only about their own desires, and they don't care who they have to step on in order to be successful and gain, what they want. But what happens with serial killers, and this is a typical pattern, and I'm going to use someone that I'm very, very familiar with, and extensively corresponded with and dealt with for years, in order to use as an example, and that is Dennis Rader, who called himself Bind, Torture, Kill. His evolution as a psychopath into serial killing, while it does not represent 100% of serial killers, it's very common. And so here's what happens. Individuals who are born with this brain, this psychopathic brain, sometimes something is triggered, awakened inside of them at a very early age, where hurting things, torture, harm, blood, dismemberment becomes somehow associated with sexual pleasure, and this triggers something or awakens something in them that then progresses over years and years and reaches a tipping point where they simply can't live in fantasy anymore, but they have to kill. And so I'll tell you the story of BTK so you can see an example of how this works.
Yeah.
At the age of 10, Dennis Rader, who grew up in Wichita, Kansas, in the United States, sort of farming country, he was visiting his grandmother's farm with his parents. And grandma was in the backyard, and she killed a chicken for dinner, and she chopped the head off the chicken. When young Dennis Rader, 10 years old, witnessed this, he became sexually aroused. But he was only 10 years old. He didn't even know what was happening to him. He just knew that he really enjoyed that sensation. So what he did is that became imprinted in his brain, that image of this chicken being decapitated. And over time, he began to obsess and fantasize about this. And by the time he reached adolescence, he combined it with masturbation. So when he did that, sexual pleasure now became intertwined and irrevocably connected to blood and violence and dismemberment and decapitation. And throughout his teen years, he fed this fantasy. He began to include images of women and bondage and fetishism and torture and torment, and always combining it ultimately with strangulation and masturbation. And he became a peeping Tom in his community. He later became a burglar. He would actually break into women's homes, steal their underwear, and masturbate with this underwear. And by the time he became a young adult, I'm going to say around the age of 21, he came back from military service, and on the outside, he seemed to be functioning normally. He became what I like to call a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde character. As Dr. Jekyll, the normal guy, he married his high school sweetheart after he got home from military service. He started a family. He got a job. He went to night school. But the dark side, Mr. Hyde, was fantasizing, ever feeding these terrible thoughts and compulsions about killing and torture and torment and blood and sadism. And he began doing what he referred to as trolling in his community. And what he meant by trolling is he would drive around the city of Wichita at night by himself in the car, and he would stop outside of women's homes. He'd watch them through the window. He'd take notes. He'd make drawings, take photographs. And over a period of years, he put together a catalog, an actual visual and written catalog of potential victims that he
Wow.
craved, that he fantasized about, that he wanted to kill. And this all reached a tipping point at the age of 28. So, all the way from 10 to 28, until he reached the moment where he could no longer stand to live only in his fantasies. He had to kill. And he had been obsessing over a family, a Latino family in Wichita, Kansas. Their name is Otero. And he had been watching the 30-something-year-old mother and the 11-year-old daughter. And Rader told me he was obsessed with their dark skin. They're Spanish. Their dark skin, their dark
Yeah.
eyes, their dark hair, and he craved them. He had to have them. So on one morning in January of 1974, when he could no longer tolerate it, he went to their house and he became BTK for the very first time.
Wow. That's wow. So it's basically becomes this obsession
Yes, it's a total compulsion.
because he links it with sexual pleasure, masturbating, and so on. It because sexual energy is a very powerful energy. So if he continuously confirms it to himself by repeating all these behaviors and then cataloging a whole bunch of praise in his little book,
Hmm.
and if he's got those tendencies, if he's already born a psychopath, they don't have the break in their brain. Like they're not going to stop. If they want to do it, they'll do it because they're not going to feel, then he's not going to
Yes.
care because of their screaming. That makes it probably going to help. It's probably an encouragement for him if they start to scream, and because that's part of his fantasy, right?
Yeah, well, the answer is yes, generally, but I mean, he would even have behavior that is so twisted it's almost inexplicable. He he might be torturing them, and in the middle of torturing them, ask them if they want a glass of water or if wipe their forehead off because they're sweating. So he would have this incongruent behavior that it doesn't seem consistent with what he was doing, but yet in his mind he's a very principled actor. He sees nothing wrong with what he's doing, and therefore he wants to accommodate them in some way.
Yeah,
So
he hasn't lost his manners in his head. He think he's got good
exactly,
manners.
he's a
Yeah.
very respectful psychopath and torturer and killer. Exactly.
Mm, wow. Uh,
Yeah.
it, so I know you've said it, and I know I've just mentioned it, but I'm just not clear in my head. Are they is when they kill when it comes
Mm.
to that? Because you mentioned about the evolution,
Hmm.
and if nothing stops them in their evolution, then when it comes to doing it, is it like a compulsion? Like that's it. There's no stopping them now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the answer is yes. It becomes the thing that is important to understand about serial killers is they are very, very different. There's this another common myth that they're all the same, that they're all motivated by the same thing, and that's simply not the truth. They do come in all varieties, gender, intelligence, etc. But the one thing that they all have is this underlying need, compulsion to kill, and in particular, kill strangers for a reason that's based upon a psychological need that's borne out through fantasy that just escalates and escalates and grows and grows inside of them for years until it becomes an itch that they absolutely have to scratch. They can't stand it any longer. They must do it. And what happens is once they do it, it doesn't sustain itself. In many ways, the killing is often a letdown. I've had these individuals tell me that the killing itself is a letdown. It didn't live up to the fantasy that they had built it up to be over all these years, and it's ultimately unfulfilling, which is why they have to do it again and again and again. It becomes this like almost like a narcotic high. And I actually have used the analogy that in many ways, serial killing is almost like a heroin addiction because you get used to it, you need more, the craving comes back, you got to have it, and no amount that you take is enough. You always need more. Well, it's very much like that for in serial killing.
Isn't it interesting though? Because what I imagine, or what from what I've heard from people, let's say like when you mentioned about heroin, someone having a high, the first time is what's incredible, and then you get hooked. Where here
Mm.
it sounds like the first time they kill doesn't live up to the fantasy, but then they keep trying, hoping it improves.
Yes, yes. In
So,
in in yes,
yeah,
and in many instances, serial killers will say that their very first killing is actually unfulfilling because if they're going to make mistakes, if things are not going to go as planned, it's their first murder where that's likely to happen. Because, like with anything, practice makes perfect, right? So they
yeah.
get better as time goes on. So they want to keep perfecting. They want to keep upping the thrill, making it more exciting, making it better. So yeah, if anything, it's that first killing that is the least fulfilling of all.
So I'm just writing something down, so don't forget to ask you, because you come in, you like you say so many good things. I'm like, I want to dive into all of it. But you mentioned about they were killing strangers, right? You
Hmm.
mentioned but
Hmm.
I know for example, John Wayne Gacy, he killed people in his area and people who worked for him, I think.
Well, not exclusively, but some
Not
of them,
not
yes.
exclusively, yeah. No, he was yeah, he did not discriminate, let's put it that way. So there, I
Right.
guess that there's a variety. Okay. um
Yeah.
and so so this is interesting because you mentioned about how this is why a psychopath or like psychopathic serial killer are not as easy to catch because they are so cold-headed, and so they don't really make mistakes. So
Hmm.
does that also mean that if the authorities arrest someone after one gruesome murder, I'm not talking about like, a car accident, like not accident, like something that was really intentional, a murder. Um,
Hmm.
um, if someone's arrested after the first time, my thought was before speaking with you was how do we know that that person is not a serial killer because he was stopped after the first one?
Hmm.
But given what you said, if they're very sloppy and that's how they got caught, the likelihood of them being psychopathic serial killer is probably not so likely.
Well, you're describing to a certain extent what has actually happened over the last 30 or 40 years. And what I mean is, up until the 1970s, very little was known about serial killers. And they didn't, and the FBI in the United States didn't even call them serial killers until 1973. They lumped them together with mass murderers. They just called them mass murderers because they didn't really understand. So in the 1970s, the FBI formed its behavioral science unit, and perhaps some of your audience has seen the Netflix series Mindhunter, which depicts the early days of the FBI's profiling unit. And I've gotten to know some of those original profilers, and they are the ones who really helped us to understand how these individuals think, how they're motivated. They came up with new techniques of detection and profile and ultimately apprehension, and then got much better at apprehending these individuals. And the big game changer of all was in 1986 when DNA came along, because that enabled for the first time individuals to be linked biologically to a crime scene where there was no other physical evidence available. And that solved a lot of long-term cold cases where they had, semen and other things from the crime scene, but they could never link it to anyone because the DNA science didn't exist at that point. So many infamous serial killers, like the excuse me, not Green River, Golden State Killer in the United States, BTK, the Long Island serial killer, have been apprehended through DNA. So,
Mm.
yes, this is a long winded way of answering your question by saying I truly believe that many wannabe fledgling serial killers are being apprehended after their very first killing before they even go on to achieve serial killer status, simply because we're just much better at identifying and apprehending them now. And so, yes, you can't prove a negative. I mean, we can't prove that this is the case, but very little else would help explain why the number of serial killers in the United States has dramatically declined. I mean, in the 1970s, it's estimated that there were about 650 serial killers in the United States in the 1970s. That number went up to more than 800 in the 1980s. But as I said, then along came better science, DNA, and now this decade, the 2020s in the United States, we're down to somewhere between 2 and 3 dozen serial killers identified in the United States. And
Ah.
I do not believe that that is because the pathological mind that would lead one to becoming a serial killer has gone away and has left the human condition. No, no, no. I think it's because of these much better technology, policing techniques, and even I think a contributing factor is all this true crime programming, TV shows, podcasts, radio that we love because it's taught us to be vigilant. It's taught us to be wary, and not take risks like people did hitchhiking across the country back in the 1970s and 1980s. So I think the
Oh, even
published
in the
has,
90s. I was a teenager in the 90s, and I had friends who hitchhiked. I had a friend who hitchhiked from Belgium to Spain.
yeah, there you go. There
Yeah,
you go.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and so the public is just much more wary now. We're more vigilant. Technology is better, policing is better, and I think for those reasons, the number of serial killers has dwindled. And again, in order to become a serial killer, you have to have the requisite number of murders under your belt to be so identified. So if you're apprehended after your first kill, even if you want to go on and kill more, you'll never be a serial killer.
Ah, I see. I hear. Yes, 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 yeah. What is the number for serial killers that they need to
Well,
have?
there's not a finite number. I prefer to go by what is often considered the classic definition of serial killers that's been around for a number of decades, since the 1980s, which says three victims in separate and distinct crime scenes that are not related,
Mm.
and where there is what is known as an emotional cooling off period in between the murders, where the perpetrator goes back into his or her normal life and goes about their normal routine. And that is to distinguish this from what is known as a spree killing, where someone kills three people or more in a very short, truncated period of time before they come down from the emotional high of that.
Mm.
Now, the FBI, however, in 2005, changed their definition. Their definition is simply two or more victims in separate and distinct crime scenes with or without the cooling off period in between. So they have really widened the net and opened it up. And the reason they say they do this is that for the purposes of apprehension and trying to capture these individuals, it doesn't make any difference. But for me, scientifically, and in terms of understanding their pathology and mind and teaching, I think that the earlier definition is more useful for me.
Mm. Yeah, it seems also more collected, as you would
Hmm.
imagine someone who's a bit more cold.
Hmm.
And so is that also the difference between like would a mass murderer is someone who goes into a school and shoots 50 kids, or like War of Crimes,
Yeah,
for
well, a
example?
mass murder is a broader definition than, say, a mass public shooter.
Mm.
Most mass murders, at least in the United States, and I suspect probably around the world, are actually familicides, where someone just kills their entire family.
Oof.
Though that's more common than the individual taking a gun and shooting up the shopping mall. So most mass murders are actually familicides, but the ones that get so much attention now are the public shooters that take a gun and shoot up a
Yeah.
shopping mall or a school, that sort of thing. And the mentality, I'm glad you brought this up, because the mentality, the mindset, the motivation of a public shooter is completely different than a serial killer. A mass shooter is a very fatalistic individual who is very angry at the world or some specific institution like a school or an employer or a religion or something, and they go in and they want to go out what they perceive as a blaze of glory. I'm going to make a statement. I'm going to kill as many people as possible today, and then I'm going to die right here. More than half of them die right at the scene of the crime, and oftentimes they even turn the gun on themselves. So these individuals are angry, fatalistic, and they want to make a statement. Serial killers are killing because they love to kill. They can't imagine anything more wonderful than killing. And the last thing they want to do is be caught or die because they want to do it again and again and again.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Is that so? The mass murderer,
Mm.
is that a sociopathic trait, would you say? Because like very
Not
volatile.
necessarily. Not
Ah,
necessarily. I
ah,
mean, these typically are troubled individuals. Some of them would probably be clinically mentally ill, and if I had to guess, more public shooters would be clinically mentally ill than serial killers. But that doesn't mean that they're all necessarily clinically and mentally ill. And another very common myth about shooters, public shooters, is that they snap. They simply like just one day just go crazy and get a gun and start killing people. No, that's not the case. These events are typically pretty well planned as well. Yeah, I live in Las Vegas, and some people remember the October 1 Las Vegas shooting here, so, a few years ago, where the individual was in the Mandalay Bay and shot all the people at a concert right outside his
yes.
window.
Yeah.
And he had planned that meticulously, and he had also planned his own death because once the police finally burst into his room, he shot himself.
Mm. That is, oof, what a world we live in. Do you know, before we go move on to another side of serial killers, I wanted to ask you, are you familiar with the Dr. Death podcast series?
Yes, yes, I am.
Yeah, and there's one of the season, the one with Dr. Dunch, who's the neurosurgeon who basically kills so many patients.
Mm.
Um, are you? I don't know if you're familiar with him at all,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
because
Oh, I know the case. Yeah,
yeah, because
and
I wonder for me. I mean, okay, can I give you my diagnosis and then you tell me what the real diagnosis is?
yeah. Well, I mean, I do have an opinion on this, but go
Yeah,
ahead. Tell me what
so
you think.
yeah, so my opinion, as not being an expert, but my opinion is that I mean he's a psychopath, for sure. And to me, the amount of people that he kills, um he doesn't look for, not sure that he necessarily look for a certain type of people other than they are his patient, but so I don't know if he's a serial killer, but he definitely, like, he just does not seem to have any remorse at all
Hmm.
over what he does, and he keeps going on and on and on, and he even, like, his best friend gets decapitated internally,
Hmm.
right, and the best friend forgives him. I don't know how and what, I don't know how many. I mean, that in itself is like a miracle. But I mean, he's a psychopath for sure. I mean, yeah. Okay, so
Hmm.
go on. You tell us what the
Okay.
deal is.
No, I would agree with you that based upon what I know, I would think he most likely is a psychopath, but he would not be a serial killer because his intentionality is not murder. He thinks he's the most brilliant surgeon in the world, and he has these techniques that he's perfected. Well, he hasn't perfected them because a lot of people end up either permanently disabled or dead, but
Yeah.
his intent is not the killing. So he's not a serial killer either by action or default. What he is he's just he's a psychopathic individual, who certainly belongs in jail, but I would not categorize him as a serial killer.
Yeah, because that's the thing. He's also very, because he's not actually really good at what he does either.
No,
Like
he's
when you
he's
listen to the
in fact they
podcast, he's
say
very
he's bad.
sloppy. Yeah,
Yeah,
but he
yeah, no,
gets
yeah,
away.
other experts, say because he has his own signature technique, that he
Mm,
thinks is going to save the world, and clearly it doesn't work. And they said even his basic skills are not good.
yeah,
So you definitely have an individual who's very grandiose, narcissistic, full of himself, psychopathic, but not. I mean, his intentionality is not to kill. It's just,
yeah.
but when he does kill, he doesn't care.
Yeah. Oh, it's honestly it's chilling. It's like when you
Hmm.
listen to that
Hmm.
podcast, how he gets the whole system, how he also gets away with it. I mean, the system is I mean, it's so bad. He shouldn't have
Hmm.
been able to
Hmm.
carry on like that. But okay, so I want to go back to like the John Wayne Gacy's of this world, and all the famous serial killers, because I find like I think like their vanity is maybe a little bit of their Achilles heel,
Mm.
because when I was reading Karen Conti's book, who was a guest here not long ago, and she obviously met him and all of that, and she wrote a book, and he really really enjoyed his infamy. He enjoyed
Hmm.
being so famous for what he did, and I wondered if that's a common trait for serial killers.
Well, great question. And I have to start with, once again, serial killers are not all the same.
Mm.
Their motivations are not the same, their desires are not the same, and that underlying fantasy need is not the same. The type of killer that you're talking about, that has this grandiosity, that likes headlines, that likes infamy, that likes to hear their name, and they sometimes, they give themselves their own names. Son of Sam named himself. He gave
Yeah.
himself the name Son of Sam. Bind, Torture, Kill gave himself his own brand name, BTK, because he was so grandiose. And I would put Ted Bundy in this category, and I would also put John Wayne Gacy in this category.
Mm.
Now, they are a particular subcategory of serial killer that is referred to as a power and control killer. These individuals like to play God. They like to be in control of life and death. It's not the act of killing. It's not that moment that they kill that is the greatest thrill for them. It is all of the events that lead up to it, the planning, the anticipation, oftentimes even the abduction and torture. John Wayne Gacy got off on the torture. BTK got off on the torture. They love it. It becomes this almost like a symphony, a rapture. It reaches this peak when they ultimately kill, and it becomes the greatest thrill of their lives. These individuals, these power and control killers, are truly psychopathic, have delusions of grandeur, narcissistic, torturers, and they love their own infamy. They love the headlines. That is different. That is different than a serial killer like an Eileen Warnos, a sociopathic serial killer, where she wasn't out for headlines. In fact, the last thing that she wanted was headlines. She wanted to be under the radar, but she became infamous despite her intent. So there's subcategories of serial killers. There's a category that is really twisted, that's known as a thrill killer. And you may have heard of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Have you ever heard of him?
Uh, yeah. What did he do? I
Richard
forget.
Ramirez terrorized Los Angeles back in the 1980s, and so here's what a thrill killer is. Their fantasy is the thrill, the escalation of the whole process. Once again, it's not about the killing per se; it's the thrill of everything associated with it. And the killing, and for a thrill killer, the killing in itself is not enough. So what Richard Ramirez would do is, and he was a psychopath also, but he would go into a neighborhood, and he was the opposite of the meticulous planner. BTK, meticulous planner. Long Island serial killer, meticulous planner. John Wayne Gacy, meticulous planner. But Ramirez was the opposite of that. He would go into a neighborhood at random in the suburban area of Los Angeles at night in the dark and at random pick a home that had an open window. He
Ooh.
would climb in that window and kill anything and anyone that he found inside simply because it escalated the thrill for him. He didn't want to know what was inside. He wanted to find out when he got in there because it was exciting. So for him, the thrill was never even knowing what he was going to find. So that's a thrill killer. So that's when I say that serial killers are not, one size fits all. It's true. It is true. And in the case of Richard Ramirez, he was not looking for headlines per se. He ultimately got them because he was so prolific and killed so many people, and he became the Night Stalker. He didn't name himself; the media named him. He got infamy despite his not wanting to get it. But so the answer to your question is there is a certain category of serial killer that loves to hear their name, that loves the headlines and all of that, but it's a particular type of serial killer.
Those ones, the ones who love to hear the name in the headlines, isn't there a
Hmm.
little bit of an inner conflict for them to want to carry on because they love what they do, but they also love the infamy. So in a way, I mean, they can actually be infamous without being caught, right? Like they can have the nickname, right? You can get the nickname by the press, and so that would satisfy both sides for them.
Well, so let's look at BTK. And this BTK was on the loose for 30 years.
Phew.
Okay, his first killing was in January of 1974, and he wasn't captured until 2004. And it was actually his own ego and narcissism that was his undoing. But what he would do is when he wasn't killing, he would engage in this terror campaign where he would write letters to the media
Mm.
and law enforcement. He frequently would give them clues even to his identity and his whereabouts. He would include trophies, pieces of clothing, IDs from his victims, playing this game of cat and mouse. Because for him, this just fed his incredible ego and his narcissism that look at me, I'm the puppet master. You can't, I control the entire city. I'm terrorizing the entire city and you can't catch me. So this just fed his grandiosity and his ego. He loved it. He loved being able to outsmart and outwit the law enforcement
Yeah, I think
and media.
I don't know, not to go into that one, but I think the Unabomber, how do you call him? Unibomber
Yeah, the
in
Unabomber.
he
Mm-hmm.
did the same, right? He would write letters and taunt,
Yes,
I think, the
yes,
press or the
yes. Yeah,
police. Yeah, yeah,
but he did it for a different reason. He had his
yeah.
own agenda and manifesto, and he wasn't killing. He wasn't doing this for the joy of doing it. He had his own like political, manifesto.
Yeah.
Whereas BTK was doing it just out of the joy of killing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that sort of answers like a lot of questions because I kind of thought that maybe some of them wanted to get caught to get the
Well, no, no,
infamy,
no. Yeah,
but
so let
did
me let me.
yeah,
I'm going to use BTK again,
yeah.
and no, it's an absolute myth that they want to get killed. It's an
Did they
absolute
want to get
myth.
caught? You mean or killed?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Yeah, it's an absolute myth that they want to get caught.
Yeah.
They Killing for them is the greatest accomplishment, the greatest thrill of their lives. The last thing that they want to do is get caught.
Yeah.
Now, in the case of BTK, when he finally did get caught, and he was undone by his own incredible narcissism and egomania, that that was his Achilles heel. What he did is he turned the tables. Then he ultimately admitted to his murders. And this allowed him to do now is get up on stage and say, "You morons, it took you 30 years to catch me. Let me explain to you in painstaking detail, and I'm going to force you to relive every horrible moment. I want the families to suffer again as I tell them everything that I did to their children, and you will listen to me." So it gave him a megaphone, a microphone to get up on stage and be the great man once again. And that's how he fed his egomania and his narcissism after he was caught.
Wow. 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 Yeah, I have no words. That's just, yeah. Whew. Um, so I guess someone like that, again, it would be different, why? Because there's so many different types of serial killer. But someone like that would probably never want to let someone else take credit for their crimes.
Absolutely,
That would
absolutely.
infuriate him. He'd rather get caught, I think, than someone else take
And he had complete disdain. His nemesis, who was killing at the same time, and one of the reasons that I wanted to correspond with both of them is because I knew that BTK hated him, was the Son of Sam. And Son of Sam got actually so much more notoriety and acclaim because he was killing in New York City, whereas BTK was killing in Little Wichita, Kansas. So he didn't get nearly the headlines that Son of Sam got. And BTK was so jealous of the Son of Sam and so disdainful and mocking and ridiculing him because he was jealous.
this is so weird. It's so like it's so weird because it's almost like a childlike behavior, like right.
Yeah,
But then
absolutely. It
but then
is.
they're like they're monsters, so they're nothing like children.
Right.
But that's why they're so dangerous, right? Because they're like a big child that has no impulse control, but and has all of these horrific ideas and plans and how they get like it's just
Exactly.
it's scary. I mean do any serial killers like other serial killers, or they're just always sort of a bit in competition and not really into
Well,
each other?
there has to be something in it for them. And so, for example, um, when I was corresponding with BTK, and this was back, started around 2010. That was the time when the Long Island serial killer emerged in New York. And I was asked by the New York Times newspaper to put together a comprehensive psychological and behavioral profile of this unknown killer called the Long Island serial killer. And along my journey, I actually took my profile that I was developing and I ran it by Rater BTK because I truly believed that we were dealing with an individual who was very similar in motivations and in desires and the way that he killed. And of
Mm.
course, Rader was more than happy to play my little game because he thinks he's the smartest kid in school and he's going to teach me. And so, to use the Silence of the Lambs analogy, I pretended to be Clarice Starling and he
That's
was Hannibal
exactly what I
Lecter.
had. That's the exact picture I had in my head when you were saying that. It's exact picture.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's what I did. Teach me, oh wise one.
Yeah.
Educate me, oh wise one. And he was more than happy to play the game. And he said that this killer is absolutely a clone of him, absolutely a clone of him in every detail, and a copycat. So and so he was intrigued by the Long Island serial killer, but only because he felt superior and that he was the original. So it did amuse him. So that there had to be something in that for him. The opposite is to go back to the Son of Sam once again. When I told Rader that at the same time I was corresponding with him, I was corresponding with David Berkowitz. He just immediately said, Berkowitz is nothing. He's absolutely nothing. He used a gun. Real men strangle. They need skin to skin contact. He's nothing. He's not a real man. So look how he was. His jealousy forced him to try to demasculate and undermine and belittle Berkowitz.
It's weird because what he says, like the way he says it, like real men do this. That formula is something that you hear in every day, right? Like, oh, real man pay for the meal. No, real man split the bill, like, or whatever. Like that phrase is used, but with the way they use it is so it's like on steroid, like times a
Yes.
gazillion, because it's like real man, the way they kill, they do this. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, what did you just say? Like
Yeah.
it's
Exactly.
so it's they're normal and not normal at the same time. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah, no,
yeah.
you're right, and that's
Mm.
the reason. They operate in our world. They are it's not like a psychotic individual who lives in a world of just complete delusion and fantasies. They live in our world, but it's their thought processes and the way that they process the world and react to the world that is just
Mm,
so completely different. And I'll take another interesting little story is some of your listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with the concept of psychological compartmentalization, and what that refers to is the ability of an individual to make two things that completely seem dichotomous work together. Like, Dennis Rader was a psychopathic killer, but he was also a father. He was also the Boy Scout leader in town, and he was also the president of his Christian Lutheran church association. So how do you make sense of all that? And in his mind, there is absolutely no contradiction there. And he what he did is he compartmentalized. But what he had the ability to do, and he actually had his own term for it, is he called it cubing. And so you've probably seen like a photographic cube, a plastic cube, and on each side of the cube is a different photo image. And so when you rotate that cube, you're looking at a different picture. Well, that was Dennis Rader's life. So one picture would be husband. Another, you flip the cube, another picture is worker, another picture is president of Lutheran Church Association. You flip the cube again, and you've got BTK, psychopathic serial killer. Well, he only lived in the compartment that he was looking at the time. You're only capable of seeing one image, and that's where he lived. So he was able, if you would say to him, how can you be a psychopathic killer and also a devout Lutheran and church member? And he would say, I don't know what you're talking about. It's two completely different things. So he did.
I mean, they are two different things, but they're not very
But they're all
compatible.
him. They're all him.
Yeah, yeah. Is that it's how? So, but okay. So here's my question to that, because yes, he has all these different. He can wear all these different hats, but assuming he's a psychopath, right? He's a
Mhm.
psychopath, right? He he may be a father, but would he feel any? Does he love? Does he know what loving his child means? And also, if he killed his child, would he feel any remorse?
Well, these individuals have their own principles that they live by. Now,
Mm.
this may not be the moral code or the principles that you and I live by, but they tend to have their very strict principled moral code. And typically they do not
They don't shit
kill
what they
people.
eat. Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They don't prey upon their inner circle, right?
Right.
And I'll take it as far as to say this: BTK's daughter, her name is Carrie Rawson, wrote a New York Times bestseller called "Serial Killer's Daughter," and in this, she describes her life with her father, and he seemingly, even though she admitted he was kind of cold and could be indifferent at times, he paid the bills. He took her to Girl Scouts. He came to her school plays, did all the stuff that it seemingly a normal, father would do. And so she was as shocked as anyone when in her 30s she found out that her father was one of the worst, most diabolical killers of the 20th century. She was completely blown away. So these individuals have the ability to mimic. They know what they should
Yeah, so
do.
they know what to do. Like you said, they can mimic laughters and crying and all of these things. But I
Exactly.
guess my real question is, does he really care about his daughter? It's like Ted Bundy and Gacy. They had wives and children, but did they actually have affection for them?
They, in their own mind and way, they would say yes, but I don't think it's emotion the way you and I would know it. It's not true emotion. It's their manufacture of emotion. It's them saying, "Look, I'm a good person. I have these feelings." They don't really, but what they're doing is they're manufacturing their own reality and their own universe. And so the distinction, the individuals in, say, the mafia or any criminal organization, they have their code of conduct that allows them to operate, and it's called a diffusion of responsibility or diffusion of guilt. We don't kill people who aren't in the mafia. We don't kill the innocent. It's just business, which it's only along business lines. They knew the rules. They broke the rules. Therefore, they die. That is a code of conduct that allows them to minimize their guilt. They're not all psychopaths or sociopaths. Some of them certainly would be, but what BTK in creating his own world, his own reality, his is not a shared code of conduct. It is just the principles that he's created that allow him to function in the world. I've asked him, did you love your family? Oh, absolutely. I love my family. I love my family very much. Well, I don't think so. I don't really think so in the way that you and I would
Yeah, so they have
understand
a
that.
different way, right? It's just a different, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's hard to
And I'll
know.
take it a step further. I'll take it a step further. He was very good at hiding this from his own family. And Carrie Rawson, his daughter, who wrote the book, as I said, has recently been drawn into cold cases that are believed to be connected to her father. Now,
Mm,
Carrie had not spoken, written, had any communication with her father since 2005 when he was arrested, and or excuse me, 2004 when he was arrested, until just a few months ago. And for reasons that you would well understand, she just wanted nothing to do with this man after she
yeah.
found out who he was. However, at the suggestion of the police and the FBI, she did go and visit her father a few months ago in order to see if she could extract any information about these cold cases that might be useful. Well, Carrie said for the first time, and she's in her 40s now, for the first time in her life, she actually saw her father become BTK in front of her. She said because as she asked these questions, his eyes turned black, he glazed over, and he transformed into BTK right before her eyes.
Oh my God, I feel for her. I really do.
Yeah.
I don't know how you'd process that your dad, who maybe was a bit cold, but it's that generation, maybe men at the time they were not, as involved into, and culturally it depends as well, right? But then from that to knowing what he did, and then years later you actually face it, a glimpse of it. I mean, that's terrifying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, are you okay for time? Because I want to ask you a few more questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Go ahead.
You're just an incredible, incredible guest. I could listen to you for hours. I wanted to ask you, you corresponded with BTK and Son of Sam. Did you ever
Mm-hmm.
meet them?
Oh yeah, I spent an entire day in prison with the son of Sam. BTK, no, because he's locked up in solitary confinement. You're not allowed. His daughter
Wow.
was allowed access to him, recently, but otherwise he's in lockdown.
Wow. And so what other thing is there anything like in particular that you had not expected from whether it was corresponding with BTK or meeting Son of Sam? Was there anything that you did not anticipate despite having studying criminology
Well,
and
yeah, yeah. For those of your audience who know the story of the Son of Sam, it's a pretty incredible saga. In fact, it sounds almost like a fairy tale. It might be something for like Ripley's Believe It or Not, because he was ultimately apprehended in 1977, the summer of Sam, after shooting 13 people, killing six, disabling many others, and basically just terrifying the New York City. It became the biggest manhunt and crime story of the 20th century there in New York. And so anyway, he was finally apprehended. And he believed, by the way, that Satan was driving him to kill. He falls to a category of serial killer known as a visionary serial killer. There are serial killers who believe that they are being commanded to kill by some outside source. Yeah, and that outside source could be God, it could be Satan, it could be Ronald McDonald, it could be the man in the moon, it
yeah,
could be the Beatles, it could be
yeah.
anyone. And in his case, it was Satan. Now, so he goes off to prison in 1977. And he believed for the first couple of years that Satan was going to come and release him from prison because he had done Satan's good work. Well, that didn't happen. And then 10 years went by to 1986. And he realized, oh my God, things are not what I thought they were. And he started slowly over time to become depressed and ultimately self-loathing and even suicidal. And by 1986, the son of Sam was sitting in his prison cell one night and he was going to hang himself. He was going to hang himself with a bedsheet. Well, here's where this really, like I said, becomes Ripley's Believe It or Not, because Berkowitz told me that that night, God entered his cell and in a flash of light touched him, and all of his sins and transgressions were washed away. And in one moment, he was transformed from the son of Sam, serial killer, into the son of hope, evangelist and apostle of God. And so now, since 1986, he has been a minister. And incredibly, he has a very large evangelical Christian community following around the world. They actually operate a website on his behalf that has drawn hundreds of thousands of visitors from around the world to his website. So he is no longer the son of Sam. He is now the son of hope.
I get it that from his side, that is what he says he's experienced. Do I believe him or not? I don't know. I wasn't there. But what I just can't handle is like people actually on the outside following him as the minister.
Hundreds of thousands of people.
I don't get that. I don't get that.
He actually has a, he's not allowed, excuse me, he's not allowed email, but he has an old-fashioned Smith Corona typewriter that I've seen because I spent an entire day in prison with him. And he corresponds with thousands of people around the world on this old-fashioned typewriter. So, you asked me if there's anything that I was shocked by. Yeah, when I went into the prison to see him at his request, I, still had the vision of this very troubled, angry, violent, young man. But I was sitting in this commissary area waiting for him, very brightly lit, and it was surrounded by vending machines, all kinds of hot and cold food and drinks and stuff like that. And so I came there. I had a huge bag of quarters with me for these vending machines because the administrators of the prison said, if you feed him, he will talk, almost like you're at the circus, or the zoo or something,
Yeah.
He will perform. He will perform. So I'm sitting there, and without skipping a beat, the door opens up. And instead of this angry, troubled, violent guy, I see a short, chubby, balding, middle-aged guy with big red rosy cheeks and a smile. And he comes scampering across the floor. He looks like one of the seven dwarves or a ceramic backyard gnome or something like that. And he comes over and gives me a big old serial killer hug, if there is such a thing. And then we sit down, Angie, and he says the Lord's Prayer because he's a minister. So we say the Lord's Prayer together. And then we start eating. And he is eating up a storm. And it turned into one of the most incredible experiences of my life.
I mean, I'm sure he can be super charming, but look, John Wayne Gacy could also be super charming. If you were not his type, he would be really, really charming. And hug people and be extremely funny. Was Son of Sam, if he was very angry, would you say he was a sociopath serial killer?
In the past. I think that he had a borderline personality disorder. I don't think he was a psychopath. I do not think he's a sociopath. He is definitely, in my estimation, capable of empathy, emotional connection. But he was a very troubled individual who became obsessed with Satan. And so I would not put him in the same category, either in terms of his motivations or even his mental state as, say, a Bundy or a John Wayne Gacy. He's different. But he is no longer threatening in any way. First of all, you got to remember, he's been in prison since 1977. He's been in the prison most of his life. And the other prisoners, most of whom are much younger than him, don't even know who he is. They
Yeah.
call him Brother Dave, and he now assists in the chapel, helps with the Sunday sermon in prison. He has been transformed into something that if he's acting, then he is the Daniel Day-Lewis of serial killer actors because he
Right, right,
deserves an
right.
Academy Award.
Is it, I mean, do people who follow him on the outside, do they know who he is?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Uh-huh,
Because I
uh-huh.
mean, his whole website is dedicated to this transformation from son of Sam to son of Hope.
I mean, when you say, because obviously, because I had assumed that he was a psychopath or sociopath, but when you said he has personality disorder, I am sort of leaning towards believing him that he is,
Hmm.
but I would not feel secure in him being released because I know there was talk he was trying to get released and that
No,
was
he was
denied.
not. No, that's incorrect. He was
Oh,
not trying to get released as part of the code of the criminal code. He comes up for periodic probation review, and it's approximately every 8 years or 12 years. And he just came up recently, but every time he comes up, the committee just laughs and they send him back to prison.
what's a probation review? Is that just so to see to reduce his sentence or?
It's no, it's to decide. There's a committee that decides whether he has been rehabilitated and whether he should be released into the community.
Ah, got it.
And every time they come to the same conclusion that he should be right where he is.
Yeah.
And even he admits that he is where he belongs. He just wants to continue to do God's good work, along the
Ah.
way. Um,
Okay, okay. So he's not trying to come out. Well, I guess he's got.
no,
I guess he's
I
got
mean
it
he.
sorted. He's got his church and everything inside.
Oh
So
yeah, oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, he seems to be a very happy little camper.
yeah, and people feeding him when they want to talk
Oh
to him.
yeah.
So that's all good. So I wanted to sort of quickly check with you if there is any, like, what is the main difference between male and female serial killers?
Oh, that's a great question. So female serial killers are relatively rare, just as female murderers are relatively rare. The statistics in the United States are that about 90% of all murderers are men.
Mm.
And however, interestingly, although serial killers are far more rare than only 1%, roughly 1% of all murder victims are victims of serial killers, only 1%. Nevertheless, among serial killers, documented serial killers, about 15% are women. So isn't that interesting? 10% of all murderers, but 15% of all serial killers. So I don't know. I mean, I'm being a little bit tongue in cheek here, but women don't. Not a lot of women kill, but when they do kill, they kill a lot. They kill
Yeah,
frequently.
yeah.
I'm being a little facetious.
They're thorough. Women are
They're good
thorough.
at it. They're
They're
good
good
at
at
it.
it. They're good at it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Now, to get to your point, however, they tend to kill for different reasons.
Mm.
Female serial killers, it's rarely, almost never about sex, and it's almost rarely never about power, control, and domination. It's often about retribution of some sort, like Eileen Warnos. If for
Mm.
her, she was on a mission. She gave herself the mission to kill these men who she believed
Yeah.
were responsible for her torment.
I mean,
So she
she
would.
felt very, she must have felt very justified.
Oh yeah, she's like a
Yeah.
vigilante. She saw herself
Mm.
as like a vigilante and very justified in doing this. They also sometimes will kill for there's another category of killer called a power, or excuse me, not power, comfort and gain killer, a comfort and gain killer. And this category of serial killer is more often female than any other type of serial killer. And these are the women who will. You've heard about like the black widows, like the old ladies who will run a rooming house and then take in old people, steal their money, and then poison them. Stuff like that. The black widow killers, or the women who kill their husbands. Are married 7 times and kill all their husbands. They
Oh,
would be a
yeah.
serial killer. They would be
Yeah.
serial killers, and so it's this power gain category where they're killing for insurance money, extortion, social security benefits, that kind of thing. That's where you see a lot of female serial killers.
Then you also have some that are really, really cruel. Like I saw online, there's some who are like, child killers, like Mara Henley, and
Hmm.
others who target the elderly, like Juana Barraza, and then the mentally
Yeah, well, but that's
disabled,
often it's
I
often
mean,
out of a mistaken, you've got the nurses, you got the nurses
yeah,
that kill people. And they
yeah,
think, sometimes they think they're doing so to put these people out of their misery. And there are male doctors who do the same, do the
yeah.
same thing. So they're not killing necessarily because they want to see people suffer and
Oh,
die. They actually think they're doing the world a favor,
they're doing God's work, basically.
yeah, yeah, and by the
Mm.
way, there is I mentioned mission killers. There are individuals who give themselves, and I'll give you an example. There was a soldier in the United States war with Iraq. And he was taught to be a very proficient, highly, highly skilled sniper. One of those guys with the telescope from a mile away, he would shoot
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Well, he goes over to Iraq and he never got to do that. Instead, they made him a truck driver, which to him he thought was a very low level job and was beneath him and did not utilize these wonderful skills that they gave him. So after a very unfulfilling time driving a truck around in Iraq, he came home and he decided, I am going to utilize my skills as they were intended. What's a category of individual that Los Angeles doesn't need? Homeless men. So I'm giving myself the mission of eliminating homeless men from Los Angeles. So he got his rifle and his telescope and he went around Los Angeles shooting homeless men.
Oh my God. Oh my
And
God.
when he was arrested, he justified it by saying the government didn't use me correctly. If they had used me correctly and allowed me to use my skills, then maybe I wouldn't have had to do that.
Well, he's got his own logic. So,
Yeah, exactly. And it's
yeah,
called neutralization of guilt. He's neutralizing his guilt. It's not
yeah.
my problem, it's your problem. You didn't use me the way you should have.
Oh, do you know what? That's so funny you said it that way because that's almost like, when people do something bad at work or with their partners, they justify it and they go, well, you should have paid me more, or you shouldn't have, like, you should have given me more attention, or that kind of stuff,
That's right.
It's like you try to neutralize, you justify what you do.
Yeah.
Um,
We
yeah,
actually call it, there's in criminology, we call it condemnation of the condemner. In other words, how dare you condemn me? You're the one who's bad, right? Yeah, it's your fault.
it's like gaslighting at its finest.
Yes, yes,
Almost, it's like,
exactly.
and gaslighting themselves too on some level as well, right?
That's right.
Okay, so that's, yeah, so that kind of almost like removes this question that I had about who's the cruelest between male and female killers, because like you said, some of the women, like, like if they were nurses and stuff, they were not doing it to see them suffer. They're doing it because they probably think they're doing God's work. It's not like a BTK who gets off on the horror of it all.
No, no, no. And
Mm.
women rarely torture. The female serial killers are rarely torturers, whereas John Wayne Gacy and Bundy and certainly BTK and the Long Island serial killers derive tremendous delight from watching their victims suffer. And again, that for them, that was more enjoyable than the killing itself. It was watching their victim, like a cat playing with a mouse before they kill it.
Yeah.
That was their enjoyment. That's rarely the case for women. Women are much more pragmatic. They're killing, as I said, for financial gain because they think they're justified. Female serial killers tend to be much more practical and pragmatic in their reason for killing.
I don't know if I'm relieved to hear, but it's kind of funny a little bit. It's kind of funny
Yeah,
to
well,
hear that.
I
Yeah.
know. I mean, some of these
Yeah.
things, that's why there's dark humor in all of
Yeah.
this. And
Yeah.
even in my show, which I'm doing right now, tour in the United States, this dark humor comes up because some of this
Mm.
stuff is just so bizarre. It's almost you almost have to laugh because
Yeah.
it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand how, like, if, like scenarios like you were saying about Eileen, the prostitute, if she had been really mistreated in that way, going like by a lot of men, I can see why the revenge would come in because it would drive you crazy. Some people they don't have the break, they don't have that. Other people, they can get through horrors, like horrifying situation, and come out and still able to smile and be kind and not want to hurt people. But everyone is built differently, right? And reacts
That's right.
differently.
That's right.
So
Everyone reacts to that trauma differently, because I mean,
exactly.
it truly was trauma, and people respond to trauma differently.
Very differently, yeah. So before I ask you the finishing thoughts, I wanted to check with you because you've said a lot of things about psychopaths and sociopaths and serial killers, and a lot of it was like really eye opening. I hadn't realized before. Um, so the thing with like, because obviously you mentioned all these traits of sociopaths and psychopaths, but how do we know if we're dealing with one? Like,
Mm.
because for example, psychopaths, that's probably the more difficult one to know because they can mimic what would a behavior we would expect them to have. But sociopath, they're more volatile. So this, but how do we know if we're dealing with one, let's say at
Yeah.
work or in a relationship or in the family?
Yeah, well, my female audience in the show that I do, I ask this question a lot, and that's part of the reason why I think they're even there is to learn these things. Um, so a a psychopath is not going to have the volatility. They're not going to have these mood swings and bouts of rage and so forth. They're going to seem much more distant, and cold blooded. And you want to look for reactions that just don't seem quite right. If you think a situation is particularly, sad or stressful, and they just don't respond to it, or for that matter, something that seems just very joyful and lovable, and they don't react much to that. That's a bit of a sign that there's something off there. Or if there's even a delay in their reaction, it's like a delayed reaction, and then it kicks in. Well, that's could be they reminding themselves, oh, I should really, I should react to this in some way. I should have some response to it. And then, of course, just callous indifference. Maybe it starts out by you don't notice a callous indifference toward you, but you can see a callous indifference toward their family or toward their coworkers or their friends, supposed friends, that sort of thing. And just and of course a lack of remorse where things just don't bother them. Any signs of sadistic tendencies, or getting any sort of enjoyment from the suffering of others. Even extensive narcissism to the point where they can only see the world through their lens, that they're incapable of seeing how something might affect someone else. In fact, that's a very powerful sign. If you're talking to an individual and you're reasoning with them and you're trying to have a conversation, and if they are simply incapable of seeing how anyone else would respond to something other than the way they respond to it, that's not a good sign.
It's like sometimes would it come across a bit like excessive, like just mega stubborn, and just you cannot have a two-way conversation because they will not listen to any other
Yeah,
take. You
yeah,
have to
but
co-sign everything they say.
yeah, yes, but again, the lens would be their inability to see how anyone else could react to this differently or how it would affect anyone differently. That's really what you're looking for. I mean, there are lots of stubborn people and control freaks who aren't necessarily psychopaths. So yeah, what you're looking for is their inability to just see how this might affect someone differently than the way they view it.
Okay, yeah. And what would be a sociopath? Like how would you know if you're dealing with a
Well,
sociopath?
there you're looking more toward the emotional volatility.
Mm.
Some of the same traits, some of the same traits of indifference and callousness and lack of remorse, lack of pity, no ability to sympathize or empathize with people. But there, you're also looking for then additional, like explosive bouts of rage. Like, where's this coming from? Why are you so angry about this situation? Because you can't control it. They can't control the situation, so they become explosive. So
Mm.
so it's some of the psychopathic things, but then also with these really unexpected mood swings.
Yeah, and it's like it's like anything, right? It's like it's not looking at just one trait. It has to be, there's a whole family of traits. Like, it's like if someone seems always a bit distant, they could just be like a bit of an introvert. They're just being shy. But it's like putting everything together and
Yes.
having those things, and some of the traits a bit more pronounced, like like the no empathy at all, and like the extensive narcissism. Like when you put it all together, that's when you can start to think, ooh. But it's just someone is just may react a bit different than what you would on certain things, does not make them a psychopath. It's just you have to put it all together, right? It's like, so
Yes.
it's not that easy to actually even know if someone is, if you don't know them that well. You'd have to
That's right.
really,
And
yeah.
and it's also, this is important to understand, is that it's not an either or black and white situation. It's not either you are a psychopath or you're not, or or you just or it's black and white. It's a spectrum, just like other things in life, like
Yes.
autism. The autism condition is a spectrum from high to low. Well, it's the same thing with a psychopath. It's high to low. So some people can manifest some of the behavior and patterns of a psychopath, but in a mild way that it really doesn't affect their life that much, or their relationships with others. Or they can be, incredibly profound, like a BTK. BTK is way up there, at the highest end of the spectrum. You're going to find BTK and the Long Island serial killer and Bundy and others. So it can be relatively mild as well.
Yeah, yeah, like the really good surgeon. He's just going to be mildly psychopathic, but
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
but the level that you want, because you want him to be good at his job. So it just all goes, it all goes in roundabouts. So I want to say thank you so much, because, and I know this is something that you mentioned, and I don't want to take more of your time, 'cause I know you're a very busy man, but I know you mentioned how women are the biggest audience, or like in terms of like fascinated about serial killers, and I do want to say I think is quite a healing thing for us, because it's like when I had Karen Conti on the show and I read her book, I was like, the book triggered me a little bit, but then it's almost like I had to face it and I had to understand it, and I actually felt a lot less scared about it. It was like facing those facts a little bit, facing, going into their minds and understanding a bit more. Is in a way, weirdly enough, is kind of a healing thing to do.
Yes, I like to call it a cathartic experience. And
Yes, yes.
for more than a year now, I've been traveling with this one man theatrical show that I do. And as I mentioned to you, 80 to 90% of the audience is female. And
Yeah.
what I notice over the course of the evening is that there is almost this catharsis as I explain this situation, as I take them through the facts, as I explain these individuals, and as I explain to them that actually it's very, very unlikely that you're ever going to become the victim of a serial killer. It's almost like this relief. It becomes almost like a sisterhood over the course of the evening, that we're all in this together. They're all in this together. They're there to learn. They're there to experience. They're there to release. And by the end of the evening, it has become just this like peaceful release of all of this anxiety.
Yeah.
And I believe that that's one of the benefits of true crime, and why true crime is so attractive to a lot of women.
Yeah, it's actually quite a relief to say that it's very unlikely to be the victim of a serial killer, because it's so
In
rare.
fact, in
Yeah.
fact, here let's. I frequently make the comparison when I talk to people that a serial killer like a Jeffrey Dahmer actually is very much like another predator in life, the great white shark, and they have three things in common, and that is that they are both rare, exotic, and deadly. And in the
Mm.
case of Jeffrey Dahmer, he was also a cannibal. He ate people. So that's four things that they have in common with the great white shark.
Yeah.
And it turns out that your odds of being attacked by either a great white shark or a serial killer are roughly the same, and that is more than 100 million to one.
Yeah.
So that should allow your audience to hopefully sleep very well this evening.
Do you know, we didn't even get into that. I'm not gonna say, because I know it's gonna be late, but like, yeah, the cannibals. I mean, those who eat. I mean, that's just a whole other ball game altogether. I mean, it's oh my goodness. So I want to ask you the two finishing thoughts before you tell us where we can find you and how can people sign up to go to your tour in the US.
Mhm.
The two questions are this. The first one is, what life lesson do you wish you'd learned sooner?
Well, in terms of dealing with these individuals, I didn't quite realize when I started corresponding with them that their only motivation is what would amuse them. There has to be, if they're going to correspond with me, if they're going to open up, there has to be something in it for them, or they're simply not going to do it. And so I think I went in a little bit naively at first that, maybe they would just do this for the good of humanity. Because I was a college professor when I was writing this book. And I realized over time, no, they're very cold-blooded, narcissistic, selfish individuals. So there has to be something in it for them. So I
Mm,
realized over time that I had to begin to modify my presentation and how I ask them questions in order to make it interesting, to
yeah.
them.
You
That's
had to,
that's
you had to pitch it to them.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. And the second one is, what do you not put up with anymore?
What will I put up with anymore? Yeah, glorification of these individuals. In as much as they're certainly interesting, and I think it is important to understand the dark side of the human condition. What I don't tolerate is the glorification of this stuff. You can even, we mentioned that Jeffrey Dahmer was a cannibal. You can buy Jeffrey Dahmer cookbooks. I mean, crazy. I'm
Oh,
not kidding. I'm not kidding you. People who seek to exploit this, and there are, trading cards and action figures. There's serial killer action figures, all kinds of crazy stuff designed to make money and profiteer off of the misery and suffering of others. And so that kind of exploitation, I think, is not only disgusting, it's really immoral. And there are attempts to outlaw it, but some of this stuff still gets through the cracks.
yeah, because that must be hard for the families of the victims as well.
Oh, yeah, I mean, think about it.
Mm,
Every time something like this crops up, they have to relive the horror of it again. Their
yeah.
family member being killed, or their friend, loved one, whatever.
No, 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 it's awful. Um, is there is before we you tell us where to find you, is there anything that you'd wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to say, that you'd like to share with us?
Um, well, just that serial killers are a very small aspect of murder, whether it's in the United States or around the world. I mentioned this, and it's important to understand. There's currently about 20,000 homicides each year in the United States. 1% of those murders are committed by serial killers. So that's 200 victims. That of course, is a tragic loss of life. But it's very clear that serial killers are not what's driving the homicide problem in the United States or for around the world, for that matter. So once again, these individuals are rare, they're exotic, they're deadly, and we tend to be attracted to them for one reason or another, to study them, and because they are fascinating, like great white sharks. But let's not glorify them, and let's not assume that they are the ones that are responsible for so much of the carnage out there. They're actually a very small segment of a homicide problem that is plaguing much of the world.
Oh, Scott, thank you so much. Please tell us, where can people find you, your website, your tour, everything, and your book,
Sure.
everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently doing a tour throughout the United States, a one-man theatrical event. It's a 90-minute show where I take people inside the minds of some of the most diabolical, heinous serial killers of all time, based upon my actual interactions. And this event is touring cities currently, domestically in the United States. And to see a list of the upcoming cities and dates, you can go to my professional website, which is docbon.com, and I'll spell that DOC B as in boy, ONN.com. And if you scroll down, there is a whole list of all the cities and dates that are upcoming. My next show is actually in St. Louis on August 4th. I'm going to be in St. Louis if anyone's in that area. And there are links there to purchase tickets as well. So, and also on my website, you can check out the book that we've been talking about here during our discussion. And that book is Why We Love Serial Killers, The Curious Appeal of the World's Most Savage Murderers. And this is a really in-depth look at serial killers and our fascination with them. And it goes into my in-depth analysis of Son of Sam as well as BTK. But it also seeks to demystify and debunk many of the myths about serial killers. And I designed it as really a place to go, one source that will tell you everything about serial killers that you ever wanted to know. And so that book, you can also, it's on Amazon, Why We Love Serial Killers, The Curious Appeal of the World's Most Savage Murderers. You can purchase on Amazon, and it's also at my website as well.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you, Scott. Really, really, really. This has been such a pleasure talking with you, and I've learned so much. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been my pleasure as well, and thank you for having me.
And that's our episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. It can be a screenshot that you text them, a link, the name of it, any of those will do. If you give a 5-star rating and a review, that really, really helps the algorithm for it to be shared on all the different platforms. And just a little note, please be aware that this podcast is always free to listen to. Any platforms that want to charge you for it are doing so without my consent, okay? This is free. You can listen to it on Apple, Spotify, all of the other regular listening platforms that don't charge you. This is free. So don't let someone charge you to listen to my podcast. Until next time.
Using health inappropriately.